Hello, it's Joseph, and in this video I will show you how I created this display stand with light and sound effects for my lightsabers. There are definitely simpler ways to display your lightsabers in your home, but of course I couldn't settle for the simplest way, so I hope you enjoy watching this process because I was pretty happy with the results. Just as I did with my lightsaber chassis, I went to Fusion 360 to design my display stand. My initial design did not include light and sound effects, but from the very beginning, I wanted to make sure that the Jedi Order emblem and the Jedi Code were incorporated into the design. I blended the emblem from the Jedi Knight video games with the standard Jedi Order emblem. The Jedi Code is also in Arabic around the outside of the display stand. Eventually, I got the idea to illuminate the emblem and Jedi Code with LEDs, so I created a base to hold all the electronics. It was just a simple matter of measuring all the parts that I would need and then cut spaces into the design. It was also important to try to think ahead and consider where wire paths would travel. As you'll see later in the video, I mostly was successful in creating enough space for all the electronics, but there were a couple spots where they could have used more space. With the design complete, I sent the file to the 3D printer. I used the Ender Max 3 printer, and I have thoroughly enjoyed using it for various projects. The display was printed in 3 sections. I started with the base so that I could immediately check to make sure that the electronics fit. I'm glad I did this because I did need to print it off a second time. Then I printed the top section, which holds the lightsabers, and then finally I saved the emblem for last. The next step in the process was to improve the aesthetics of this display with some painting. Before painting the display, I began a lengthy process of sanding down the entire outside surface to help everything look a bit smoother. Paint tends to enhance veins and lines from printed plastic, so I started with about a 60 grit sandpaper just to get most of the rough edges off, but then I moved gradually towards an even finer grit of sandpaper. Before painting, I masked off all the openings for where LEDs would shine through, where switches and ports are, and any other openings that I didn't want paint to get into. If paint did get into these openings, that would of course disrupt the diameter of those spaces and make it more difficult to get the electronics in, and possibly force me to have to do additional sanding to make sure everything fit. Then I took it outside and primed it with black primer, then got to work on painting. For painting the display, I decided this would be a great excuse to try airbrush painting. I purchased this compressor and airbrush. Links in the description if you are interested in trying these out yourself. I started with darker colors such as black metal, moving on to dark gray metal colors, and then I added highlights using combinations of silver and dark blues. I actually repainted several times until I got it close to the look that I was looking for. I just tried to stay patient and not worry too much if I made a mistake, especially since this was my first experience with airbrush painting. I also used really fine grit sandpaper in some spots to smooth out the colors and help them to blend together a little better. Before applying a satin varnish to the final product, I took this failed print and tested it to see how many layers of varnish I wanted on the final product. And then once I had an idea of what I wanted, I applied the varnish onto the stand. This helps give it a bit of a metallic shine, at the same time sealing in the paint and protecting it. All the electronics used in this display stand are mostly the same as what I use in my lightsabers. Everything was controlled with the Crystal Focus 10 sound card. I also put in a BT909 board, which allows me to connect to the display stand with Bluetooth on my phone or computer or tablet. My main switch is a 12mm AV switch with an LED ring. In this case, it's red. And I also had a simple tactile switch for auxiliary controls. I also used a kill switch instead of a recharge port so that I could save battery by just simply flipping that switch to cut power. The sound for this display will come from two 28mm bass speakers. I used 179 pixel strip LEDs for the lights, and that required a 330 ohm resistor. I used an inline resistor in this case instead of an SMD because I was not using a PCB. Everything is powered by an 18650 lithium-ion battery. In addition to these electronics, I also added the ability to connect the board to my computer via USB-C connection, and this also allowed me to charge the battery through the USB-C port. If any of you that use the Crystal Focus 10 are curious as to how I set up the Crystal Focus to use a USB-C port for charging and data connections, links are in the description to resources on how you can make that possible in your lightsaber construction. For all my projects, I use the following tools and supplies. I have a variety of colors of wire in 28 gauge, 24 gauge, and 22 gauge. The gauge depends on what the manual recommends for wiring of certain pads from the board. I use flux in all of my solder and also have some solder wick on hand in case I make some mistakes. I have a static-free soldering station, wire strippers, and electrical tape. And in a tackle box, I have several sizes of heat shrink for preventing bridging. To start the wiring process, I place all the electronics in their slots to make sure everything fit correctly. This is also the point where I cut my LED strips to their various lengths. I'll post a couple of wiring diagrams on screen for you so that you can pause the video and look at them. But these diagrams will also be available in a Google Doc that I'll have linked in the description. Soldering wires coming directly off of a battery always makes me really nervous, so I'm usually careful about how long I apply heat to the leads from the battery. I highly recommend you do your own research before you solder to a battery and don't take what you see on screen at face value. Setting up a kill switch is pretty easy. I just take the negative from the battery to the switch and then take the negative from the switch to the board, whereas the positive from the battery goes straight to the board. After I was done with the battery and kill switch, I moved on to wiring up the 3 chips to add USB-C charging and data to the CFX install. When you look at the diagram, you'll notice that one of the chips is a micro USB connection that takes data straight to the board, while the other chip allows for power to pass to the board. Then I moved on to wiring the auxiliary switch, which is pretty easy, just 2 standard wires, positive and negative. Doesn't matter which one. Then I moved on to the main switch with LED. One of the connections, I added an 82 ohm resistor for the positive connection to the LED. And then the other 2 connections for the switch are just like the auxiliary switch, just pick one for your positive and negative. I made sure to carefully test all these connections before soldering, and I recommend you do too, so that way you aren't accidentally frying the LED. I then moved on to preparing my speakers for installation. Since I wanted to have 2 speakers for the setup, it was important that I wired the speakers in parallel, not series. When looking at the CFX manual, the manual states that it can handle 4 to 8 ohms of impedance. Since these speakers are 8 ohm speakers, wiring them in parallel ensures that they will run at 4 ohms of impedance. If I were to run them in series, they would double the impedance to 16 ohms, which would exceed the board's specifications. I then moved on to connecting wires to the positive, negative, RX, and TX connections on the BT909 Bluetooth module. This one comes with a breakout board from the custom saber shop. Next, I started making all the little wire connections to the LED strips so that they can be attached in sequence. Then before connecting all the components to the CFX board, I ran the wires down the paths I needed to and applied a little E6000 glue to the USB-C port. I did have a couple of issues with how I set up the wiring for this project. The LEDs progress clockwise on the outside, but when they got to the center section, they progress in a sort of zigzag motion. When I programmed my LED effects later on, this did add some unnecessary complexity that I could have avoided with a different pattern. Additionally, I underestimated the amount of wiring around the soundboard, especially since I added 2 chips to allow for the USB-C charging and data connection. So I ended up having to take my Dremel and make a little extra space. Also, the LEDs would have benefited from being a little bit lower down inside the base. This would have helped with diffusion later on. So I made the adjustments to the design in Fusion 360, but didn't feel like reprinting the whole base at this stage and just proceeded with the project anyway. With the wiring done, the final step was to add adhesive to the back of the LED strips to hold them in place. Since this is not a lightsaber, the entire display should pretty much remain stationary, so I didn't feel like I needed to add any extra adhesive to any of the electronics. Before doing any adhesion, I did do a bit of a test with all the electronics to make sure everything was set up. On screen, what you are seeing is me using the Lightsaber of the Bells sound font by Jay DeLorean with animations by Tristan Cram at crystalfocus.net. The diffusion material that I put inside the display was just some plastic diffusers and foam diffusers that I picked up from the local hardware store. I also designed slots for 4 832 set screws to hold the top of the base together. So once everything was where it needed to be, I just took an Allen key and screwed the top and the bottom together. The CFX has what's known as GraFX Animations. This allows you to create custom bitmap files and use those to animate your LEDs. I used a program known as Paint on my PC to create animations for my lightsaber. This does come free with Windows 10 or 11, I believe. However, if you have access to Photoshop, that's even better because it gives you even more abilities. Tristan Cram has a lot of tutorial videos on how to use GraFX Animations on his website, crystalfocus.net. I also created my own custom sound designs as well for the display. The current one I am working on is trying to capture that feeling of meditating inside a Jedi temple. Here is a demonstration of my display with custom LED animations and sound fonts.
There is no emotion. There is peace. There is no ignorance. There is knowledge. There is no passion. There is serenity.
There is no chaos. There is harmony.
There is no death.
There is the Force.
only when one ceases to listen that we grow still.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed watching my journey to create my customized display stand for my lightsabers. For someone who has little experience with painting or with creating bitmap animations, I felt pretty good with how this project came together. If you yourself are interested in taking on a similar project, such as creating your own custom lightsaber, please look down into the description of this video for links to video tutorials, stores, and YouTube channels, as well as a link to a Google Drive folder for wiring diagrams and manuals. I'd like to acknowledge a few people before I sign off. First, I want to thank the Custom Saber Shop, Smuggler's Outpost, and Stock Custom Works for many of the materials I used in this project. These are pretty neat stores for you to get supplies for your projects, and if you are curious where I purchased these electronics, start with these stores first. I also want to thank Jeremy at Solo Sabers LLC. He posts regular videos on his YouTube channel showing his lightsaber commissions. And if you have ever been interested in having someone else do a commission to install electronics into a lightsaber project for you, I can't recommend him enough, and I highly recommend that you check out his channel. He has been both inspirational and pretty educational for me to watch his designs and learn from him. He also will do live online workshops, either with himself or with some other saber makers in the community, and you can really learn a lot from those workshops. So I also suggest you keep an eye on his channel and watch out for those. Also, I'd like to thank Irv Plechter and Tristan Cram for the great resources that they provide for helping people program the CFX soundboard. They are usually pretty active on the official CFX group on Facebook, but you can also go to crystalfocus.net to check out Tristan's mini tutorials, and also you can check out Plechter Labs, where you can get manuals and other information on the CFX board and other products from Irv Plechter. You can also hire Tristan Cram to do custom GraFX animations for your lightsaber. So maybe check him out on crystalfocus.net or his Facebook page to see if you might be interested in using him to create animations for your lightsaber project. Finally, I want to thank all of you that have been following the channel and have been leaving encouraging comments. Recently, a follower of this channel emailed me to share his custom lightsaber project, and he told me how my original about 25-minute video helped him figure out how to do his own project. So I wanted to say thank you to that follower for sharing that with me, and I was really glad to help. This is really the main reason why I share my experiences on this channel. I, of course, am not an expert. I am an amateur, so take some of the things I do with a bit of grain of salt, but I do share these things to hopefully show some of the things that go right and some of the things that go wrong, and maybe that will help you as well as you prepare for your project. Well, that's all I have for this video and for this project. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time I finish a project.